Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Uh, where's everybody? I don't see even a count of 0 on the number of people watching. Anyway, so tonight I wanted to talk about um, a few things as just sticking with our general theme of talking about the Israeli attack on Gaza and the horrific toll that it's taking. And also wanted to, or I want to look at what a couple of politicians have had to say about that. Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders, who, as you know, were candidates for the presidential nomination in 2000. And a lot of people, of course, supported Bernie Sanders, probably the most popular candidate, and Tulsi Gabbard was popular among a certain segment of the population who were very concerned about foreign policy. And well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about Gabbard. Back in that period when she was still in Congress and she was running for president, she had a fairly progressive record overall, considering that we're talking about Congress here. So basically, hardly anybody's politics are good, but she had a very good record on environmental issues. She was the first person to introduce a climate change bill into Congress. She had pretty liberal domestic policies. She supported a variant on universal health care similar to Australia's universal health care program. But she was most noted for her stances on foreign policy, where she basically was the only person, certainly running for president, who took a contrary position on almost every foreign policy issue that her party had a position on. And so she was about the only person in Congress who opposed the various forms of U.S. intervention in Syria and called out the false flag allegations that Syria's government had used chemical weapons. She opposed coups or coup attempts in Bolivia and Venezuela. She blasted Donald Trump for assassinating a leading Iranian general and political figure. And basically, for the most part, opposed U.S. Military interventions. One issue where she wasn't all that great at the time was Israel, but even there it was kind of a mixed bag. So, for example, unfortunately, she opposed BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the movement of the Palestinian diaspora and Palestinian supporters worldwide to follow in the footsteps of the movement against South African apartheid and bring political pressure to bear on Israel through boycotts and divestment and so forth. And Tulsi Gabbard opposed that. She often voted to support military aid to Israel. However, at the same time, she quite frequently condemned the Israeli government. Let's see if I have an example here. No, I don't have it up and I don't feel like looking for it. But she condemned Israel for its attacks on peaceful protests in the Great March of Return in 2018, and basically said, look, they're shooting unarmed civilians in cold blood. That's totally not okay. They need to stop. But fast forward to 2023, when on October 7th, Hamas and I guess it's the Al-Qassam Brigade is their armed wing, and other armed militants from Gaza launched an attack on Israeli military outposts and settlements surrounding Gaza. And as I assume you know, Gaza has been under a blockade for, let's see, what is it, 17 years, where only very limited supplies of food and water and electricity and fuel and medicine and so forth were allowed in. Gazans were not allowed to leave Gaza without special permission. They even had warships off the coasts and wouldn't even let Palestinian fishermen go out and fish, let alone anybody enter or leave Gaza by sea. And so what happened on October 7th was that the Palestinian armed resistance breached the fence between Gaza and Israel in several different places and attacked and took over a military base and various military checkpoints and settlements. And in the process, a lot of people, both military and civilians, were killed. And the allegations were overwhelmingly in the Western media and on the part of the Israelis that all the civilian deaths were caused by Hamas, deliberately killing civilians or something. And now we have, and there were other allegations like supposedly 40 babies had been beheaded and there were mass rapes of women and this or that atrocity was alleged against Hamas. Most or all of these atrocities turn out not to have any evidence to back them, as I've discussed on the show before. But finally somebody showed up. Hopefully there's more than one person watching. But anyway, so in the weeks following that initial spate of publicity about the events of October 7th, it came out that Israel had, in fact, the IDF had fired on kibbutzes and on people fleeing from the vicinity of the music festival, where a lot of people were killed with helicopter gunships and tank shells and missiles and bombs from aircraft and so forth. So, and there were a lot of Israeli eyewitnesses who said, "Yeah, look, we were being held captive, or we're in the same house with Hamas or other fighters from Gaza, and Israel just fired tank shells at our house and destroyed it and killed almost everybody, including both Hamas fighters and Israeli civilians." There was a video released recently of a helicopter gunship attack on people fleeing from the Reim music festival. Not distinguishing whether they were Hamas or other Palestinian soldiers or civilians. And so that in all likelihood is how a lot of the civilians killed at the music festival were killed, was through friendly fire. So we still don't know a lot about who killed who, but we do have pretty good evidence that it wasn't just like this these horrible butchers from Gaza committed these terrorist attacks and that's how 1,200 people or whatever the figure is died. But if you look at the reactions of Western politicians, their rhetoric hasn't changed, and right from the beginning, there was condemnation of Hamas, but not of Israel or of the IDF. So let's have a look at what Tulsi Gabbard, who's well known for supposedly being a proponent of the Hawaiian philosophy of Aloha, where you treat people with respect, even if they're complete strangers. So I titled this No Aloha for Palestinians, and it indeed seems to be true that there's very little on her part for Palestinians. So let's have a look here at what she had to say. Let's try this one. Yeah, be nice if it would just come on up. Okay. So Tulsi says on October 9th, a couple of days after Hamas et al. Launched their attack, the United States must stand with Israel in the face of this terror attack by the Islamist terrorist group Hamas. This is just the latest example of the greater war being waged by both Sunni and Shia Islamic jihadists throughout the world. This should be a wake-up call to leaders everywhere that Islamic jihadists are the greatest short and long-term threat to the safety, security, and freedom of the American people and people throughout the world. So what Americans or other people throughout the world, other than Israeli soldiers and civilians living illegally in the vicinity of Gaza, has Hamas ever been a threat to? Or Islamic jihadists, at least in recent years, and why is Hamas simply a terrorist group as opposed to a group that's trying to liberate Gaza from basically being an open air prison or concentration camp, whatever you want to call it, where some of the fighters, yes, have indeed committed crimes against civilians. There's pretty good reason to think that that did happen based on the evidence that we have. But on the other hand, there, as I mentioned, there's all this evidence that many civilians, as well as soldiers, because Israel also bombed their own military base in an effort to liberate it from Hamas, from Al-Qassam, whatever you want to call them, killing many soldiers, in the process, and the shelling and so forth of the kibbutzes resulted in not just deaths of Palestinian soldiers, but also deaths of civilians. We don't know who killed how many, but it certainly wasn't just Hamas. But anyway, by this time, October 9th, Israel is already engaged in a massive bombing campaign, almost exclusively directed against civilians because, of course, Palestinian soldiers are well protected in underground tunnels that exist throughout Gaza for the most part. So, overwhelmingly civilians that are being killed. And, you can see that when you look at the figures on deaths. So over 11,000 people in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, have been killed. And well over 4,000, perhaps it's up to 5,000 now, have been children. How many child soldiers do you know of? Contrast that with the figures that you'll find in Haaretz, basically Israeli equivalent of the New York Times, where out of roughly 1,200 people killed, almost all of them are in the age group of from about 18 to 30. Very few children, no children under 4. So the beheaded or burned babies or whatever story is complete bullshit. And I think something like 500 of those killed were in the military or security forces. Hardly any in Gaza that have been killed have been. They don't keep exact track, but we can safely infer, given the age distribution of the casualties and the fact that Hamas is able to stay underground, protected from Israeli bombs, that the overwhelming majority of the casualties are civilians. But anyway, let's see what else Tulsi had to say. On November 1st, on Fox News, she had this to say.
At things like what Representative Cori Bush is saying, what the Squad is saying, what so many of these other people are saying who are accusing Israel of committing a genocide. It is the height of hypocrisy, because they're apologists and supporters of these Islamist Hamas terrorists who are calling for a genocide, the extermination of all Jews, not just in Israel, but around the world. And we're seeing this being carried out by these.
Okay, so, all right, I'm going to stop it here and respond. Well, let's break this down. She's saying that, Kamala Harris and the Squad are supposedly supporting Hamas, and,
the Squad is saying what so many of these other people are saying who are accusing Israel of committing a genocide.
Okay, so people are accusing Israel of committing a genocide. She can't even condemn Israel's carpet bombing of Gaza, or their cutoff of food and water and every other basic necessity of life almost completely from Gaza. So they're starving people out and depriving them of water, and hospitals. There was a story this morning, or maybe it was yesterday, of 39, so approximately 40 babies in a Gaza hospital who died because the electricity of the hospital was cut off, and the incubators therefore couldn't run that they were in. As opposed to the 40 beheaded babies story that Israeli propaganda has concocted being false, the reality that we can see on video is just at that one hospital, 40 babies approximately in Gaza were killed by Israel, and certainly a lot more than that overall, and thousands of children. It
is the height of hypocrisy, because they're apologists and supporters of these Islamist Hamas terrorists who are calling for a genocide, the extermination of all Jews, not just in Israel, but around the world. And we're seeing
this being carried out. Okay, well, even if you go all the way back to 1988, which is well before the vast majority of soldiers in Al-Qassam or other armed groups were born, you don't find Hamas calling for killing all Jews worldwide, or even in Israel. And more recently, they make a clear distinction in their 2017 charter between Jews and Zionists. And they don't even say kill all Zionists. They just say Zionism needs to be ended, and we have every right to engage in armed resistance to end Israeli apartheid, end the Zionist state that's dominating us, and that we don't have any quarrel with Jews per se. They've said that, and look, Tulsi, who is actually committing the genocide here? It's not Hamas. it is Israel. Ross Siegel, who is a professor who's an expert on genocide, professor of genocide and Holocaust studies, calls this a textbook case of genocide. And how is it not? I mean, just indiscriminate bombing of hospitals and schools and ambulances and neighborhoods and apartment buildings and on and on and on. Plus, just a complete state of siege where all basic necessities of life, which because of how Israel has wrecked their economy over the years, Gaza can't provide for itself for the most part. Cutting off all basic necessities of life, what little capacity to generate electricity or purify water or what have you. Israel has made sure to bomb that. So one hospital was being supplied with electricity by solar arrays in the neighborhood. Israel took out all of those. So anyway, I talked about this last week, I believe. There's absolutely no doubt that this is a genocide. 11,000 people plus killed in only a month. That's just like several hundred people a day being killed. And we'd think back in history to a lot of horrible things that have happened in the last few decades. Even say the Iraq War wasn't on a day-by-day basis as deadly as the attacks currently being carried out by Israel against Gaza. And of course, as I've mentioned before, they're also attacking the West Bank, where Hamas doesn't even exist. So you can't blame that on Hamas, certainly. So anyway, let's let her continue here.
Seeing this being carried out by these violent mobs and threats and other things that are happening against Jewish people literally around the world. And the worst part is they're doing this under the guise of, well, we care about innocent people and we don't want people to get hurt, when in fact they are in essence supporting and apologizing for the barbaric actions of Hamas against innocent women, children, and civilians.
Okay, so not one word about the violence of the IDF and Israeli settlers against innocent women, children, and I guess she meant men, because that's the only category of civilians left. Thousands and thousands, Tulsi, and she's carrying on about supposed violent attacks being carried out against Jews around the world. Where? I mean, yeah, there have been a couple of assaults, but a Palestinian American boy was killed, stabbed to death in Chicago. Not a fucking word about that. This is just. I mean, in the past, a few years ago, she was careful to draw distinctions between, say, civilians in Syria who she displayed empathy for. They're suffering under the attacks of Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliated groups in Syria. But distinguish between them and the actual terrorists like Al-Nusra and so forth. And now that that distinction's just gone out the window, and the only people in this conflict she seems to care about are Israelis. Any sympathy for Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims, which of course, as many Palestinians and people elsewhere in the region are Christian. They're not just Muslims. But anyway, just no consideration for them whatsoever. It's disgusting. And I'm glad she's against the war in Ukraine, but it certainly doesn't make up for this. Okay, let's move on to Bomber Bernie. So on October 7th, Bernie Sanders says, I absolutely condemn the horrifying attack on Israel by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. There's no justification for this violence, and innocent people on both sides will suffer hugely because of it. It must end now. So, essentially, there's no justification for this violence, supposedly. Even though, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, attacked military base and other groups of troops and security forces surrounding Gaza and keeping Gazans locked in their prison. They're trying, and also they intended to, capture some prisoners of war. Some of the ones who got captured, and it's not clear who captured them, were civilians, but the vast majority were people in the military prisoners of war, and the intention was to use them as bargaining chips to get Israel to release the many thousands of Palestinians that it was and still is today. The numbers approximately doubled in the last month, being held in Israeli prisons, often without any charges or just ridiculous charges such as whatever the charges they level in this case, but somebody liked a pro-Palestinian tweet on X or whatever, and, they get thrown in jail for that, or certainly if they protest against the Israeli government or criticize it in any way, they're likely to get rounded, or certainly if they resist the occupation anyway, they'll get thrown in prison. And so anyway, there was justification for this armed uprising. There was certainly no justification for any deliberate attacks on civilians that took place, just as there's no justification for Israel doing that. But in fact, as we've talked about before, under international law, people under military occupation, people under colonial occupation, have the right under international law to resist in whatever manner they see fit, whether it's the Great March of Return, the nonviolent protest in 2018, where Israeli snipers picked off and killed over 200 people and wounded upwards of 8,000, or armed resistance. I mean, during the Holocaust, some Jews engaged in armed resistance against the Nazis. Is anybody condemning? Would Senator Sanders condemn that as a horrifying attack on Germany by Jewish terrorists or whatever? There's no justification for that violence. So I replied to Bernie. I said, so would you also say that the violence against Germany, Japan, and Italy during World War II was unjustified, Bernie? Violent military action by the Allied forces to stop fascism. And granted, there were other motives on the part of the United States and some of the other players, but that's another story. But without armed resistance, fascism would have perhaps taken over the world. And where are your condemnations for the decades of Israeli violence against the Palestinians? Because certainly it overwhelmingly outweighs Palestinian violence against Israelis, and thus armed resistance is justified. And in fact, I said, you've supported most of the violence by the government you've been a part of for the last 30 plus years, and have people arrested when they protest your support of it. So for instance, in the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia by the United States and other NATO powers, Bernie Sanders was all on board with that, and people came to his office and protested, and he had them arrested. He's also had people arrested just recently for protesting his support for Israel during this recent escalation in the conflict. And I cited an article here, great piece in left. What the hell is it? Left Voice, not on our side, on Bernie Sanders and imperialism. It just goes through his record of his 30 plus years in Congress and shows how, in almost every case, he's supported U.S. military intervention. He stood against a small number of coups that the U.S. has backed, but basically, if the U.S. sends troops somewhere, Bernie is all on board with that. Very, very rarely does he oppose it. The only exception that comes to mind off the top of my head is Yemen. But even the Iraq War, supposedly he was big on opposing that. In fact, during the 90s, Bernie Sanders voted for U.S. bombing and sanctions of Iraq, which killed several 100,000 people. He voted for, after the Iraq War was launched, he voted for funding the military occupation of Iraq throughout the early 2000s. There's a reason why I like to call him Bomber Bernie. He's certainly not by any stretch of the imagination anti-war. He never has been. Back in the day when Tulsi Gabbard was running for president, I contrasted her foreign policy stances and voting record to his. And at that time, she was much better. Not anymore. Although I will say Bomber Bernie supports the Ukraine war and Tulsi Gabbard opposes that. So I'll give her that. But on Israel-Palestine, just a horrible, horrible, horrible perspective. And Bernie is maybe a little better. At least he expresses some empathy for people in Gaza, but he's refused to call for a ceasefire. And so let's go to that now. Okay.
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turning chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go. So
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I'm
okay. So Hamas has got to go is being used here as a justification by Bernie for refusing a ceasefire and letting Israel keep bombing and murdering Palestinians. I don't know what to say except, Bernie Sanders is a joke. He's just not, as the title of that article said, not on our side in terms of standing against, in this case, genocide in Palestine. There have finally been some, it's very interesting in Congress. Basically, no white people, except I think a senator from Illinois, no white people in Congress are supporting a ceasefire. The only people who are supporting a ceasefire are the perhaps half a dozen members of the squad. But actually, more generally, most of the Congressional Black Caucus is pretty horrible. But Rashida Tlaib, in fact, is Palestinian American herself, has family in Palestine, and she has taken a very strong stance, against U.S. support, strong stand for ceasefire and calling out the genocide for what it is, and support backing the slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which is, as I've talked about before, a call for Palestinian liberation from Israeli occupation, Israeli apartheid, and a call for a democratic single state of Palestine. Whereas the Israeli lobby and Zionists claim that it's a call for genocide, which is just ludicrous. There's no evidence that that's true at all. And as I said last week, I've been going to demonstrations for Palestinian rights, Free Palestine demonstrations since the 1980s, and you often hear that slogan, and always, it's a call for Palestinian liberation, not any of this other bullshit that Zionists attribute to it. Let's see how we're doing for time here. Okay. Well, no comments. Somebody must have something to say so far, or maybe you just agree with everything I'm saying, which is fine with me. But anyway, let's see if I want to say anything else about Bomber Bernie. Oh, I know. Okay, so same clip I just showed you was promoted by AIPAC. You all know who AIPAC is, right? The American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. A lobby group basically trying to blackmail members of Congress into uncritically supporting Israel and giving them all the money they want for weapons to murder Palestinians with. So they promoted Sanders's position. Here's another tweet that AIPAC put out. Thank you, Senator Sanders, for your clear and principled opposition to calls for a ceasefire with Hamas. So AIPAC is basically saying, thank you, Senator Sanders, for not doing a damn thing to prevent the genocide of the Palestinian people in Hamas, the 2.3 million people living there, who, over 11,000 of them have been murdered by Israel. Who knows how many are going to die because they don't have any food, they don't have any clean water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, the bombing is continuing unabated. Over 1 million refugees. Israel has clearly stated, they want to kill as many people as possible. They don't distinguish between civilians and military in Gaza. If they stay in the northern part of Gaza as opposed to fleeing to the south, like Israel has ordered them to, and still bombed them when they flee to the south. And Israel has stated publicly, many Israeli officials have stated, their objective is to push Palestinians out of Gaza entirely and into the Egyptian desert. And then they want to take over all of that land. They've said they want to take over Lebanon. They've said they want to take over, they already have taken over the Golan Heights in Syria. Like the only difference I can see between Israel and the United States back in the heyday of American settler colonialism is that Israel started a lot later. The U.S. started and Canada started several hundred years earlier, that they basically completed their genocide and their conquest of the North American continent. Israel only started 75 years ago, but they're doing the same thing. They're doing the same damn thing. This asshole here on the right of your screen isn't doing a damn thing to stop it. He gives lip service to talking about, oh gosh, it's so horrible that that all these people are dying. He doesn't really say who's killing them. It's just really weird the way he dances around what's actually happening. But anyway, AIPAC appreciates you, Bernie. Keep up the good work. Okay, well, the third thing that I wanted to talk about tonight was just a few feminists who, like I was talking about, a month ago when all of us started, have just bought lock, stock, and barrel into every bit of propaganda, atrocity propaganda that Israel has put out about Hamas. All their condemnation is for Hamas. Virtually none of it for Israel. And granted, there are a lot of people involved in protesting against the Israeli occupation and genocide who are strong feminists. So I'm not saying Western feminism as a whole is bankrupt, but I'm saying that there's a pretty large segment that is pretty problematic in terms of their views on this issue. So let me give you some examples. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. Here it is. Wondering what it's like to be a Jew in Melbourne these days. This is a old school feminist. She calls herself Julie Shago in Australia, and this is a person who's been very involved in the recent women's movement in many Western countries, standing up for women's right to have female-only spaces, female-only sports, locker rooms, intimate care, prisons, et cetera, where which are I certainly support that, and the vast majority of feminists who are involved in this activism also support things like abortion rights and so on and so forth. So pretty good on women's issues, but so many of these gender critical feminists or so-called TERFs, trans exclusive radical feminists, which most of them aren't radical feminists, are horrible on this particular issue. So Julie says, wondering what it's like to be a Jew in Melbourne these days. At my tram stop last week in my Jewish neighborhood, a call to destroy the world's only Jewish state. Okay, what was this call to destroy the world's only Jewish state? Why, Julie, do you think there should be an exclusively Jewish state? Or, well, let's call it what it is, a Jewish, a white Jewish supremacist state. Because in Israel, Jews of color get discriminated against right and left. So let's be clear about what Israel is. It's this white supremacist state, okay? Certainly a Jewish supremacist state. So from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is what she's calling a call to destroy the world's only Jewish state. I've talked about this before, this bullshit interpretation of this slogan, which people in the Palestinian liberation movement have been chanting at protests since, basically almost since I was born in the 60s. And certainly I heard it, at protests I went to in the 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth. It's just a call for Palestine to be free, or for Palestinians to have equal rights and not be living under an apartheid regime that periodically, as in the past month, engages in mass murder of them. So I wasn't very nice to her. I said, "Cry me a fucking river, Zionist warmonger. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Means no more Jewish supremacist ethno-state in Palestine. Boo-hoo for you, racist. It means no more bombs raining on the heads of children in Gaza and the Netanyahu gang in jail for their war crimes." Okay, let's continue. Anya Parampil, who I have my disagreements with, but she's great on foreign policy issues, said Columbia University, this happened just the other day, suspended a student group called Jewish Voice for Peace. Wrap your head around that. And so this person who calls herself adult human female, lifelong liberal, liberal TERF, so basically, somebody who supports women's rights in every respect, including the right to female-only spaces. But on this issue, she says they are not a Jewish voice for peace. They are on the side of the terrorists. So, I said, no, the U.S. government is on the side of the terrorists, by which I mean the IDF. And, I got blocked by her for that comment. So that's why I'm using my alternate account to show you this. Anyway, a famous male involved in this campaign for female-only spaces and against just, at the drop of a hat, resorting to radical medical procedures such as puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and ultimately body mutilating surgery such as mastectomies and so forth for kids with gender dysphoria. He's opposed to all of that. And I agree with him, but in general, even though he's great on women's issues, in general his politics are quite right-wing, it turns out, and the Israel-Palestine issue is no exception. And he poo-poos the idea that genocide is occurring in Gaza. He says it's the famous genocide where Israel provides Gazans with electricity, water, fuel, medicine, food, and lets thousands cross the border into Israel so they can provide them with higher-paying jobs. Well, Billboard Chris, Israel hasn't let any of those things in for the past month, and they severely limited the capacity for such necessities across the border, which most of them were supplied by other countries, not by Israel, but they came through Israel because there's not really any other way to get them in. But anyway, what he doesn't talk about is that Israel has cut all that off, as well as bombing the shit out of Gaza for a month, and in fact, not only do Gazans no longer have work permits to go into Israel and work as migrant laborers or whatever, but a lot of them have just been arbitrarily rounded up and arrested without charge. So those thousands of people, Chris, that were previously crossing the border into Israel and working there, now they're in fucking jail, you moron. That's what Israel is doing. So fuck him. I'm sorry. These people are just, they're like, they only think about and know about one issue, and they speak out about lots of other issues, but they don't know anything. So they should just shut the hell up. Anna, I do not understand how Hamas, the terrorist group that baked babies and raped women and attacked a country without warning, is seen as the good guys, while the country who had to pick up the burned bodies of a massacre is bad for fighting back to prevent it from happening again. So, bombing, an entire territory with 2.3 million inhabitants indiscriminately is fighting back to prevent all the stuff she says happened from happening again. And we know that Hamas didn't bake any babies. There may have been some rapes. It's not really clear at this point, but certainly that wasn't a matter of policy. Attacked a country without warning. So was a unprovoked attack. There wasn't a 75-year history of occupation and brutality and ethnic cleansing or any of that. People hadn't been locked in Gaza, unable to leave for 17 years or anything like that. So Israel's the good guys. Okay. All right, and then one that really got me, blew my mind, was this well-known Canadian feminist, Megan Murphy, who, she's without question a radical feminist. She's not, she's not a conservative by any stretch, although I'd say she's kind of middle of the road on other political issues, but great on women's issues. But here's what she has to say about, and she's tweeted dozens of things or posted or whatever you call it now on X, dozens of things about the Israel-Palestine issue since October 7th. Such as the following. I am doing my very best to defend everyone's free speech, but will say that it's difficult to defend people who keep lying about what is actually going on. No, of course not everyone saying Free Palestine is defending Hamas, terrorism, rape, murder, but many are. Okay, who is doing that, Megan? Who the fuck is doing that? She asserts this repeatedly, never presents any evidence that anyone is defending terrorism, rape, or murder of civilians. So claiming that is not happening when we can all see it is happening in front of our faces, along with really terrifying anti-Semitism, is not helping your case. What the fuck are you talking about? Really terrifying anti-Semitism. I assume she means things like Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, or Zionism sucks. Israeli apartheid sucks. The Israeli government sucks. That's anti-Semitism. All right. Likewise, pretending as though the crackdowns on your free speech and right to protest is somehow new and different and much worse than crackdowns on other people's free speech and right to protest, which none of you gave or currently give two shits about because it wasn't your pet issue, does not help your case either. I guess she's referring there to, the attempts to censor the, hashtag Let Women Speak movement of, that's what people fighting for female-only spaces have labeled their movement because of the censorship that was directed against them by so-called trans rights activists. But obviously, millions of people protesting around the world about Palestine are typically not involved in this issue at all. So. Anyway, and she is not completely one-sided on this, but here she says, well, I'm not necessarily in disagreement with the Free Palestinian people. I'm in disagreement with supporting terrorism and anti-Semitism, and I'm literally supporting the free speech of those I disagree with. I just also think they have no integrity. Okay, let me see if I want to show you anything else that she said. Oh, yeah, I do have a few others called up. She says something to this effect several times. My point is, how should... by the way, she's from Canada. She's very critical of Trudeau, but apparently not of any of his foreign policy stances. But anyway, she says, my point is, how should they respond to a terrorist group who wants to destroy Israel and kill all Jews? Okay. Hamas does not want to kill all Jews. That's just absolute nonsense. But how should they respond? Do you mean how else should they respond? By cutting off all food and water to Gaza and carpet bombing the entire territory and killing 11,000 people, overwhelmingly civilians, 5,000 of them children? You're wondering what else should they do besides that, Megan? Well, maybe not committing genocide would be a start. Maybe not indiscriminately bombing people. The other day, there were snipers shooting into a hospital in Gaza, killing some of the doctors. I already mentioned the electricity supply being, running out at a hospital in Gaza, and they lost 39 babies in incubators. They died because they couldn't, their incubators wouldn't work. But yeah, there's nothing else Israel could do besides mass murder. What happens if they do ceasefire? Have you thought about that? I mean, how should Israel have responded? Oh, I don't know. Maybe they shouldn't terrorize and murder thousands and thousands of people. Will terrorize millions. Maybe they shouldn't do that. What do you think, Megan? Should they not respond? What should the response be? So here she's arguing with Daniel Mate, who's Aaron Mate's brother. And he says, in short, stop breaking international law, lift the blockade, end the occupation until there's no legal right to self-defense. Any more than a rapist has the right to break the fingers of a woman trying to claw his eyes out while being victimized. These are all mantras I've heard, yes, but practically they don't make much sense to me at this point. Israel will be dead if they don't protect themselves from Hamas by mass murdering people who aren't in Hamas, you fucking idiot. And he says, that's the mantra of mantras. What I listed are facts. I'll defer to Norman Finkelstein from here on. And anyway, and just in case you were wondering about what Megan had to say about this issue prior to October 7th, well, there you go. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, like a lot of people who never gave two shits about Palestinians or lots of other people in the global South suffering under Western imperialism. She had nothing to say about the conflict between Israel and Palestine prior to October 7th, when the people who've been characterized as nothing but terrorists by the Israeli government, whose propaganda Megan and other many other white Western feminists uncritically accept. Then all of a sudden she had lots to say about Israel-Palestine, but overwhelmingly condemning Hamas, virtually never explicitly condemning Israel, or never. So anyway, let's see. Well, I mean, the good news is that the massive protests that have been going on ever since this all started are continuing. They have ratcheted up, as I was talking about last week. They're one thing that's really encouraging is just Jewish organizations, progressive Jewish peace organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace have taken on a very prominent role in protesting again, making their voice heard in opposition to this genocidal madness and our government's support for it. At the same time, They are also very clear, Jewish Voice for Peace and the others, that as with other liberation groups, liberation movements, the group fighting for their liberation, Palestinians in this case, should take the lead in the movement, and they're just there to provide solidarity in every way they can, which certainly it's very effective for Jews to provide solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, providing a counterweight to the ludicrous allegations that protesting against the Israeli government's policies, which have devolved into obvious genocide, which Israeli government officials and people in general in Israel, a lot of them, not probably not the majority, their genocidal intentions have been overtly expressed, and they're carrying them out. Anyway, we'll see what's going to happen. Listening to Scott Ritter and most other military analysts, they think that Hamas has a good chance of doing essentially what they did the other times when Israel tried to invade and occupy Gaza, and inflicting enough damage on them so that it'll be too costly for them, and if the protest movements around the world continue to escalate, it may prove to be politically unpalatable for the U.S. for U.S. Political leaders to continue just mindlessly providing support for the Israeli occupation. I guess they did vote for additional military aid yesterday or the day before for Israel. So, we're not at the point of stopping anything yet. But when you look at things like polling numbers that show that support for Biden from the Arab American community has dropped from like 60% to 13%, and it certainly dropped precipitously among other groups. So, not quite that dramatically since all this well, not began, but escalated on October 7th. For example, even the majority of Republicans support a ceasefire, contrary to the fucking asshole Bernie Sanders, or Tulsi Gabbard. So there's hope, but tragically, I think we're going to see a lot more people dying in Gaza and the West Bank and so forth before this is stopped. But fingers crossed, we will be able to stop it eventually. And to be honest, I think even if he's actually able to run for president throughout 2024, I think that politically Biden is toast at this point, and anybody else who supports this madness is going to have a lot of trouble in November of 2024. So anyway, I will. I'm working on an article, another article for this publication, Savage Minds, that hopefully the editor will like it, and it'll come out soon. It's looking basically at this whole notion that Hamas started it, so to speak, on October 7th, and just ignoring the history that came before. And you see this pattern repeated over and over with lots of resistance to colonial occupations. You saw similar condemnations of slave rebellions in the United States. Violence carried out by the slaves was condemned, but not so much slavery. And similarly, all the ire of Zionists or just idiots who don't know any better, like some of the people I was just talking about, has been focused on Hamas and hardly any of it on the fact that Israel has been engaged in a colonial occupation that has caused enormous suffering for 75 years now, and people have a right to resist that injustice. All right. I will hopefully talk to you again soon. Have a good night.